The Speculator series with Tommy Humphreys is brought to you by Cambridge House International, the world leader in producing resource investment conferences. Visit them online at cambridgehouse.com.
Marin, thank you very much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
This is Marin Katusa, Senior Energy Analyst at KC Research. Marin is a significant resource entrepreneur, being one of the 4 co-founding directors of Copper Mountain, which is Canada's 3rd largest operating copper mine. And Marin's a very active investor in the energy space. And so we're very happy to have him here for a conversation on energy today. Can you just give us an overview of the Keystone XL Pipeline and why this decision was postponed, and just give us a bit of a lay of the land?
Sure. What this pipeline was intended to do is taking our Canadian oil sands production down to the Gulf of Mexico. It was to produce around 800,000, it would deliver around 800,000 barrels of oil a day. To put that in perspective, it would be the equivalent of almost twice of Iraq. Okay, so that's pretty significant. The pipeline isn't cheap. And yes, there's an environmental process going on, but as I said back over a month and a half ago on BNN, that this isn't going to be an easy process. It's not a no-brainer, and it's going to be delayed. So from the political lip service standpoint, what the government's done in the U.S. has said, hey, we don't want this to be an issue for us right now. Let's move it till the next term. So that's what's going to happen. But there's a few more important things that people as investors have to understand. I've been to Iraq. Doug and I went down there. You have to put on these body armors. It's not a fun place to go. Think about the trillions of dollars that America has invested in the Middle East to get its cheaper source of oil. But Iraq today produces about 480,000 barrels of oil that goes to the U.S. They produce just under 3 million barrels in total of Iraqi production. So you're looking at this pipeline would be almost twice. It would make it the 5th largest supplier of oil to the U.S., that one pipeline. Why Canadian oil is so important to the U.S. is we are their largest provider of oil. Everyone just assumes it's Saudi Arabia. It's not. Saudi Arabia is declining production every year. Iraq is declining production. You look at Mexico, they're declining production. These are going to become net importers. And you look at Mexico, they're going to become a net importer within 5 years. We are, as Canadians, the best friend for the energy solution to the Americans. Why? Because we're a stable, secure, and reliable source of oil. And you can actually project the price. The U.S. economy can afford our oil. Whereas look what happened in Libya. Right off that, the speculation comes in, and the price of the Brent oil skyrocketed, and people can't budget or run a business when they don't know what type of price they're going to have. So it's very important to understand. Now let's look at the protesters. You have all these B-rate actors coming out and saying, like Julia from Seinfeld came out and said, hey, this is bad. Well, first of all, her family's worth billions of dollars, right? And second of all, she's not an energy expert. California produces more pollution than all of the oil sands combined. So before you come to Canada and knock our oil, remember that California's bitumen production produces more pollution than ours does. Okay, so people call the Canadian oil sands a dirty oil. The reclamation makes this land look better after than it did before. Okay, so this is, I think, do you want bloody oil from the Middle East, or do you want Canadian oil sands? Make the choice.
Well, obviously, you touched on activists there for a second, and it seems like the activists that I've spoken with aren't so much concerned with the fact that there is obviously all kinds of fossil fuels being burned all the time, and what's happened importing this bloody oil you described is there and exists. But what they'd like to see is curbed and lessened consumption. And so what do you say to an activist who's worried about turning on a bigger tap and postponing the decision or the need to invest in renewables?
The growth of society, or your GDP, is directly related to your energy consumption. Okay, so there's some basics here. So first of all, Canada, as both energy and in mining, we're the leader in the world when it comes to environmental standards. Okay, I've been involved in many producing oil companies and mining companies. We are the authority in the world with Australia. Australia's done a great job also. But it's not like you're creating the pollution and not coming back and the environmental disaster. This is very approved by the government standards. You got to go through all of the different processes and stages. Now, without a doubt, the best way to reduce your energy consumption is by reduction in efficiency. But the reality is do these people want to ride their bike to work? The lifestyles are there. In Asia, it's the same thing. It's a race for energy security. And now the Americans have to compete with this flush Asian economy that wants the same things that America's taken for granted now. So it's a race for energy security. That's where we're at.
What do you think the postponing the decision, do you think it's going to have any impact on the oil price?
I think what you're going to see is the arb between the oil price and also your post-refining costs. So gasoline will be more expensive. Will it pop up the price of WTI? So it's important to differentiate between WTI and Brent pricing. Brent is what the European pricing is based on, basically, and WTI is what we use in the US. With the political instability globally, I'm surprised right now that oil is even at the $95 price. To me, I see a lot of downward pressure rather than it popping north of 100. So myself, I believe that we'll see $75 oil for WTI before we see $115 oil.
At what price are the tar sands economic?
Sure. Existing production, so companies like Suncor, COS, Canadian Oil Sands, they can break even around $60, well, let's even say $55 oil. Any new production, because of the large CapEx costs, you're looking north of $80 per barrel of oil. That said, there's two types. You got open pit or you got your SAGD. And there's different prices that come in for each, but because of the immense capital costs, you want to look at the existing producers, and these are going to be cash cows in the future.
So these activists are obviously very concerned about leaks in the pipeline, and obviously the American heartland being destroyed or violated in some way. Why aren't more refineries built in Alberta and Canada, and wouldn't that be just as economic of a solution?
It comes down to your distribution outlets. So if you really put it in perspective and take the bird's eye view, if you look at the massive pipeline infrastructure in the US, the Keystone XL Pipeline is rather insignificant. Why it's important is we've become this, protesters protest because that's what they do. The fact of the matter is these new pipelines are state-of-the-art pipelines. If there's a leak, they're going to get to it. They don't want to deal with problems. These companies are proactive. And yes, there is issues to it, but I still am a big believer that I'd rather get secure, stable oil from Canada than bloody oil from the Middle East.
What do you think the consequence of no Keystone XL means to the Americans?
Well, I think what the solution to them is, personally, I believe it's going to happen. It's going to be delayed. It's going to cost more than people expect to please all the environmentalists, but it will happen because it's part of their solution, part of their energy matrix. Because if you look at what they get from Libya, what they get from Mexico, what they get from their partners, it's all decreasing. In Canada and Colombia, which is way down in their production, the U.S. get about 350,000 barrels from Colombia a day. They're increasing, but Canada is their biggest importer. It's just about 2 million barrels of oil a day go to the U.S. from Canada, and it's increasing every year. So the Americans have no solution but to approve this pipeline.
Let's move on to fracking for a second. You're obviously a very outspoken advocate for fracking and a big investor in the space. Can you just give us a bit of the lay of the land, how it works, and what some of the environmental concerns are?
Sure. Fracking, first of all, is a major technological success currently. It's a game-changer technology. It's an American technology. And what it does basically is it goes to these fields, and the shale is the source rock for these, what we call the past oil or easy oil. And what you're basically doing is you're drilling deep, much below the water table than, say, CBM is, coal bed methane. And what's interesting today is all these protests and studies that are going on, this has gone through also a CBM, and CBM is much shallower, or think of it as closer to the water table, and it's proven that it's okay and it hasn't polluted the water reservoirs. So shale goes much deeper. We're talking about plus 10, 12, 15,000 feet down in the ground. And what you're doing is you fracture the rock to release the gas trapped in the rock, and you blast a solution in there to release the gas to come back up. And so the environmentalists are saying, number one, it's going to pollute our waters, and number two, it's going to cause earthquakes. So those are the two main issues coming from the activists.
So let's talk about them for a second. So the groundwater contamination was obviously popularized in the movie Gasland with the burning taps and the inflammatory visuals that movie portrayed and advocated for. So where does the groundwater contamination argument stand in your
Sure. If you look at, for example, the Bakken, there's been well over 70,000 fracks done in the Bakken, and if you look at North Dakota, it's got one of the lowest unemployment levels in all of the U.S. So if you want to work, you can get a job in the area. It's really revitalized this region. So of all these fracks, there hasn't been one documented case of water pollution. Okay.
This is of the 70,000.
Of over 70,000 fracks. So you're looking at this and going, look, this is going on right now. This is being monitored. Yes, there's been cases of surface contamination from poor disposal of the waters, but that's why these companies are coming up with new solutions. In our newsletter, we just recently recommended a company, a Canadian technology, that has really revolutionized the process of holding the water and recycling the water. And then the fear is the casings of these of the well bores are going to crack or leak and all that. And these companies don't want problems because it will halt production. And these are very expensive fracks, so, and the technology there is at it. Now, when you look at from the earthquake standpoint, I think I'm taking the scientific standpoint that this is actually a blessing in disguise. There's scientific research reports written that in the San Andreas Fault, they wanted to frack it to release the accumulated stress. So think of it as a ruler, and if you have this ruler and you bend it, if you crack it, it can bend a little bit more and it eases the stress. These rocks are so deep that it has thousands of years of accumulated stress, and as you frack it, it's releasing the stress a bit and you're getting microquakes to the equivalent of a bus driving beside you on the street, or while you're driving in your car, a big rig drives beside you on a highway. These are releasing the stress that's accumulated rather than it building and building and building, and like the ruler just snaps and you have a much larger earthquake. So there's evidence now that they're saying that Quadrilla, which, hope and disclosure, I was one of the larger shareholders of, but they've found over 200 TCFs of gas, which is one of the largest gas discoveries globally in the last decade. This will revolutionize UK's dependence on Russian natural gas, which is a whole geopolitical situation. This is very important. So yes, you're going to regulate it. They have the technology to make sure that they're regulating all these things. But let's keep it in context. These are microquakes. These aren't the kind of quakes that are going to, like what you've seen in Japan recently. So there's a science to it, and then there's the media emotion exaggeration of it all.
So if you wanted to find an opinion to represent every side of the spectrum, you probably could just by turning on your TV. It seems like there's always somebody's got one view or the other. And it seems like the pro-resource one to say that fracking actually relieves the stress of seismic tension. And where can someone find out more about that? Where are you getting that?
Well, I think you can. The EIA has a great information on it. All of the Canadian governments. There's a lot of research that's free there that is government-sponsored, government-led research in these aspects. If you go onto the websites of these big companies like Schlumberger, Halliburton, they have a lot of research there. Watching shows like this or BNN, they have both sides of the take. So you just need the will to educate yourself. And on the web, there's so much information right now.
It seems like the web and the media are pushing the more of the cautious approach that this can cause earthquakes. And I just read it on CBC the other day, highlighting the other side of it, that fracking can and may cause quakes. And it seems like the media is nervous, and therefore the public is. And what that brings me to is that the EPA is still in the midst of doing a study on fracking, and I think that they're saying right now the jury's out, and they don't have all the data whether it's good or not. Do you think you might be a little bit early to be advocating, and how can you be so sure that fracking is not more dangerous than it says? Than you say it is?
What I'm saying is that you can regulate the pressures that you're fracking these at, and you can control it. And if you're going to get to the point where it's going to be something serious, you can stop at it. But when you really look at the science, a geothermal project injects well over 20 times the amount of water than any one of these frack wells.
But it has better PR.
but it's green, it's friendly, it's environmental. Now I'm a big supporter of geothermal, but what I'm trying to say is, let's look at all of the science here. And you look at what Quadrilla's just published in their research, they've just said, yes, they do cause microquakes. So keeping it in context, it's the equivalent of a garbage truck driving by you, rumbling on the street when you're standing at the bus stop, or if you're driving on a highway, the feeling. So yes, there's issues with it, but with today's science, you can regulate it, monitor it, and go through the process.
Earlier you talked about there being 70,000 wells drilled in the Bakken in North Dakota. And I don't know quite the statistics in Pennsylvania, but that seems to be where there are more reported groundwater distortions and disruptions. And I'm wondering, is it because Pennsylvania is so much more densely populated than North Dakota? Because obviously there's going to be 50 times more people tapping into the water system.
First of all, the source of the contamination has to be identified. The government data has gone through. If you look at the Marcellus shale that's happened, and people look at that as like the New York shales. They've understood the science and saying, you can't just jump and blame the company. The contamination that has happened where a company has made some surface spills on the re-injection of the frack water, or what we call the brackish water, there has been issues there. But remember, the media, to get attention and clicks, like you say, for media attention, has exaggerated and they're expanding on the basic science of it all. So I don't know why it's happened the way it is, but it is what it is, so you have to deal with educating the population on it.
Yeah, it's not likely that there'll be a gas land for pro-fracking.
And you don't need it, because the reality of it is when you go through the permitting process, it's science that will speak. And the shale revolution has completely changed the game. And for example, because America was thinking they were going to become a net importer of gas, and you had many billions of dollars being put towards creating LNG facilities. Now, America is looking at becoming a net exporter of natural gas. So this changes the whole game. And in Europe specifically, when you look at countries like Poland, Ukraine, Germany, Italy, UK, Finland, for example, 100% of their natural gas comes from the Russian pipelines. Italy, over 50%. The UK is even at a third. So these countries depend on Russian natural gas, which isn't exactly the safest place to be, but yet the potential of the shale gas in the UK, they can unlock and completely become self-dependent. So that's revolutionary.
Well, revolutions, you think you're laying the ground to laying the pipeline or whatever to make money. How do investors play it? And do they invest in the oil field service companies, or do they play the fear and panic and greed in the markets? Or what would you do if you were a
you have to know
mom
what
and pop
type of
investor?
You have to know what type of investor you are. So if you're saying a mom and pop investor, what I would do is look for experts in the sector that really understand this, that is a full-time job. Do your homework, go to these conferences. There's free conferences like the Cambridge Show. There's videos that you can go on the libraries or on BNN and go into the archives and really see what's going on and see what you're comfortable investing in. And then you have to understand, what is your time frame? So there's many variables that you have to understand for. But if I was a mom and pa and I was a teacher still or whatever, and I want to put some money towards the oil sands, well, I would go and probably go to a broker in a big institution and go, do you have some research material on some of the oil sands producers, and then go through it and then find one that I'm comfortable with. Now, if you're not as into the research, maybe you invest in a mutual fund or an ETF. There's many ways to go about it. So you have to first decide what type of investor you are.
Can you tell us a bit, you're obviously more sophisticated, but can you tell us a bit about how you are an investor in this space? Are you a position trader? Are you in and out on a daily basis of stories? Are you?
No, I don't do in and out daily on anything. I'm not a trader. For example, like on Quadrilla, what we did was we invested for the longer term, and then we got bought out because of the new group that came in. And what we like to do is get in early. What I'm a big believer is investing in people. You can have a great project, but average people will ruin great rocks. If you have great people, they will find great rocks. So I'm a big believer in starting with people. So then with the Quadrilla or any of the companies that I invest in, you have to believe in the people in the long term. And then when you make your investment, for example, in the Quadrilla case, which is a very successful European shale explorer for gas, we believed in the people's technical ability. It was a private company. We didn't go and hope it was going to be a promotion or anything. It was based on technical success, and it was a massive technical success.
All right, let's move the conversation to nuclear for a minute here. I'm not from the baby boomer generation. I didn't grow up necessarily scared of a nuclear war, and when I learn of uranium and particularly the productivity of the camps in Saskatchewan, I feel inspired by the uranium and nuclear story. And I wonder, do you think that nuclear and uranium will ever really take market share from oil and gas, and should it? And where is the uranium space, the nuclear space today?
Well, it's a very different sector. It's the, if you look at movies like the China Syndrome or anything like that, it's not a popular sector. And generally speaking, people in our generation haven't hit investing in the resource sector yet. So you have to deal with what you call the baby boomers, and nuclear is not a popular sector because of the potential problems that it does hold. That said, if you talk about Athabasca, which is the greatest grade on the planet for uranium, and grade does matter, the issues there you have to look at are infrastructure. You can be, a lot of people bet a lot of money on moose pasture and lost a lot of money. The key to the Athabasca Basin is access to a mill. You can find a deposit, but what are you going to do with that deposit? So getting permit to build a mill to actually take the rock and turn it into U3O8 is very difficult, and it's kind of like a old boys club, and there's just a few companies that own the mill. So it's very important, if you're playing it, to understand all aspects of the infrastructure.
Can you tell us a little bit about compare the emissions and really the quality
Sure.
of concentration of energy in uranium compared to oil and gas? And
well, uranium is a major part of the American matrix. About north of 15% of all of the U.S. households are powered by nuclear energy, whether people want to like it or not. So all these Californian activists and actors who drive their Prius around or their electric car, you plug that car into the wall, and 50% of America's electricity is generated from coal, and I think the exact number, somewhere around 18%, is nuclear. So you're looking at two-thirds of your electricity is generated from unpopular or dirty sources. So when these activists drive around their electric cars, let's think back to where this energy is produced. So now getting that back to where nuclear is a very upfront cost. Building these plants is very expensive, multi-billions of dollars. But after you build that, the cost of uranium is a smaller part. It's about 4% change. So whether it's $120 or $60, it's irrelevant to the cost of production. It's building the big plant, and that's the issue. Now in the US, these plants are built, and you're going to see that these lifelines are going to get expanded. Again, what is America going to do? They have to expand the lifelines of this, or else the lights are going to go out. So where the play is and why uranium is so popular is people have recognized that they need the feed. These power plants need long-term contracts of this uranium to produce nuclear energy, and whether the price of uranium is $120, and it hit over $130 back in 2007, or $50, it's irrelevant to the bottom line of the power plant. So the game is, as a junior investor, is these companies hoping to find a discovery like has recently happened in the Athabasca. Now when it comes to producing on the costs, it's very comparable to coal and natural gas.
Post-Fukushima, the nuclear disaster, the earthquake that led to the nuclear disaster in Japan in March of this year, all the uranium stocks from the big caps to the juniors got hammered, yep. And the PR pot was stirred even greater, and it looks like Germany's going to take their nuclear plants offline. Do you think that in 2000 or 2022, when they have to do that, they're going to have the political will to do that, or do you think that's just posturing?
It's completely political lip service. For example, even Japan, where the disaster happened, they've rethought their focus and said, we're probably going to need nuclear energy if we want to keep the lights on. You look at China, they came out and said, it was a disaster what happened, but our technology's better. We're not going to allow that to happen. That's the government stand in China, and they're moving forward with nuclear. What Germany is doing, which I find so ironic, they said, that's it. We're scaling out all of the nuclear production of electricity, but what are they doing? They're importing French nukes energy, which is right on the border with Germany.
So there's obviously a lot of hypocrisy.
So there's a lot. And then what you're going to see in the U.S., there's over 130 reactors in the U.S. that are built. This is billions and billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure. They're just not going to close that out and invest in new gas plants or coal plants or solar panels. It's massive amounts of megawatts. So these plants will probably be refurbished and extended is the solution across the board. Nuclear is here to stay.
So do you think that the demand for uranium will be strong?
I do believe so.
So you believe the price will be up long term?
If you're speaking long term, yes. In the near term, you're dealing with speculation and market volatility. In the near term, it could have more of a deflationary environment where you'll get cheaper before it goes higher, but long term, without a doubt.
Marin, tell me a bit about the juniors in the uranium space. Do you think they're priced attractively right now, or are they overvalued?
Some of them are completely overvalued, but if you invest with the right people, with the right projects who have the right financial structure in the right jurisdictions, there could be significant upside. I think it's really a case-by-case perspective.
What about the big caps like Cameco? Are you long Cameco at $20?
Personally, I am not long Cameco, but it is in one of our newsletters.
Last question, Marin. Talk a lot about protesters today. What's Marin Katusa's one-sentence response to Occupy Wall Street?
I think the Occupy Wall Street, you have to define yourself. I'm going to use Vancouver as an example because my office is right there. If you're going to occupy public areas and not have a defined argument and create a mess, be respectful of the public property and be respectful of the people that you're trying to get the attention to. And the Vancouver scene lost a lot of respect with not just the garbage, the noise, the lack of respect for public property, and also ODing on public property. They must really rethink and redefine what they're arguing for.
So we've got cameras here. Can we follow you outside and have you engaged a little bit?
I'd rather stay under the radar.
Well, thanks very much, Marin.
My pleasure.